Do you know the man who was never defeated? The man known as the Sword of God? He fought in more than 50 battles. He never lost a single one. He was feared by two of the greatest empires of the ancient world, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Sassanid Empire. He began his life as one of the most dangerous enemies of Islam and ended it as Islam's most devastating weapon. And yet, at the very peak of his glory, he was stripped of everything: his command, his soldiers, his purpose, and sent into silence by the same side he had helped build. His name was Khalid ibn al-Walid, and his story is unlike anything history has ever recorded. Mecca, in the early 7th century, was a city of dust, heat, and power. The air smelled of incense and camel, of spice roots and old money. Rising above the narrow streets of sun-baked stone, the great families of the Quraysh tribe controlled everything: commerce, religion, and war. And among those families, none carried a more fearsome military reputation than the Banu Makhzum clan. It was into this world that Khalid ibn al-Walid was born around the year 585 CE. His father, al-Walid ibn al-Makhira, was one of the most influential men in all of Mecca, wealthy, respected, and feared. The Banu Makhzum were not simply nobles. They were warriors by heredity, horsemen by tradition, and commanders by birthright. It was they who supplied the cavalry commanders of the Quraysh in times of war. From the moment Khalid could walk, he was shaped for battle. As a child, he had been sent, as was custom among the Quraysh elite, to live with Bedouin tribes in the desert, where survival was a daily exercise and riding a horse was as natural as breathing. He returned to Mecca harder, leaner, and more dangerous. He trained with the lance, his favorite weapon. He mastered the sword, the bow, and the spear. By the time he was a young man, he was already spoken of in hushed tones, a warrior of extraordinary instinct, a horseman with almost supernatural control over his mount, and a mind that could read a battlefield the way a scholar reads a page. But the Mecca of Khalid's youth was about to be shaken to its foundations. A man named Muhammad had begun preaching a new faith: one God, one truth, one community. And to the Banu Makhzum, this was not a spiritual message, it was a political threat. Islam challenged their power, their commerce, their gods, and their world. And when the Quraysh went to war against Muhammad and his followers, Khalid ibn al-Walid was among their deadliest weapons. The year was 625 CE. The battle was Uhud, fought on the slopes of a rocky mountain north of Medina. The Meccan army numbered 3,000 infantry, 3,000 camels, and 200 horsemen. The Muslim forces were fewer, poorer, and outgunned. The early stages of the battle seemed to favor the Muslims. Their lines held, their archers positioned on the hillside kept the Meccan cavalry at bay. But then something changed. Khalid, commanding the Meccan cavalry on the right flank, saw it in an instant, the kind of clarity that only true military genius produces. Many of the Muslim archers had abandoned their elevated positions to join the looting of the Meccan camp, believing the battle was won. The flank was open, and Khalid moved. Rather than a frontal charge into prepared defenses, he rode around the mountain, bypassed the Muslim lines entirely, and struck from behind, directly into the gap the archers had left. The impact was devastating. The Muslim rear collapsed. Dozens were killed. The battle turned completely, and the Quraysh, for the only time in their wars against Muhammad, walked off the field as victors. Historians would later credit it as a masterwork of tactical thinking, a maneuver that revealed a mind operating on a different level than everyone else on that battlefield. Khalid was barely 40 years old. He had just changed the course of a war with a single decision made in a matter of seconds. But something else happened at Uhud, something that Khalid himself may not have fully understood until much later. In the chaos and the dust, watching the Muslim soldiers fight with a discipline and a faith that seemed to transcend fear, something shifted inside him. Not immediately, not obviously, but the seed was planted. In the years that followed, the political landscape of Arabia shifted dramatically. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628 brought a fragile peace between the Quraysh and the Muslims. Khalid watched. He thought. He observed the growing power of Muhammad's movement, its moral coherence, its unstoppable momentum, and he began to ask himself questions that a man of his pride and position rarely asked. What if I am on the wrong side of history? In 629 CE, Khalid ibn al-Walid traveled to Medina. He walked into the presence of the Prophet Muhammad and declared his faith in Islam. The Prophet, the same man whose followers Khalid had routed at Uhud, received him with remarkable warmth. According to historical accounts, Muhammad said simply, "A man like Khalid cannot stay away from the truth for long." The effect on the Arab world was seismic. The Quraysh's greatest military mind had joined the other side, and almost immediately, Khalid was given a command and sent directly into one of the most impossible military situations in the early history of Islam. The year was 629 CE. The place was Muta in what is now southern Jordan. A Muslim expedition of 3,000 men had been sent to the borders of Byzantine Syria. What awaited them there was not a patrol or a border garrison. It was an imperial Byzantine army, possibly 100,000 strong or close to it by ancient accounts, supported by allied Arab tribes. The scale of the disparity was staggering. 3 Muslim commanders had been appointed to lead the expedition. The first, Zayd ibn Haritha, was killed early in the fighting. The second, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, died in the battle. The third, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, fell soon after. The Muslim army, already vastly outnumbered, had now lost all 3 of its designated leaders in rapid succession. The men were on the verge of collapse. It was at this moment that Khalid ibn al-Walid, a man who had only recently converted to Islam, a newcomer among these soldiers, took command. What he did next defied all military logic. He could not win a direct engagement. He knew that, so he did not fight to win. He fought to survive and to make the enemy believe something that was not true. Through the night, he repositioned his troops, moving units from the flanks to the center and the rear to the front, creating the impression by morning that fresh reinforcements had arrived. The Byzantines, uncertain of what they faced, hesitated, and in that hesitation, Khalid extracted his army, not in defeat, not in rout, but in a controlled withdrawal that preserved nearly every man under his command. He broke 9 swords during the fighting. 9. The Prophet Muhammad, in Medina, reportedly received a vision of the battle in real time. He told his companions what had happened, the deaths of the 3 commanders, and then the salvation of the army by the man who had not been appointed to lead at all. And it was there, in that moment, that Muhammad gave Khalid ibn al-Walid a title that would follow him for the rest of his life and beyond. Saifullah, the sword of God. When the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE, the world he had built threatened to come apart at the seams. Across the Arabian Peninsula, tribes that had pledged allegiance to Islam began to reconsider. Some rejected the authority of the new caliph, Abu Bakr. Others followed charismatic leaders who claimed prophethood for themselves. The young Muslim state faced not one crisis, but dozens simultaneously. These rebellions became known as the Ridda Wars, the Wars of Apostasy, and they represented an existential threat to everything that had been built. Abu Bakr's response was swift. He sent Khalid ibn al-Walid. What followed was a campaign of extraordinary speed and relentlessness. Moving with forces that were often smaller than those they faced, Khalid swept across the Arabian Peninsula with a precision that left his enemies unable to regroup. At the Battle of Buzaka in 632, he crushed the forces of Tulayha, a self-declared prophet who had gathered a powerful following. At the Battle of Yamama in 633, he defeated Musaylima, another false prophet, in some of the most brutal fighting of the entire campaign, in which both sides suffered catastrophic losses. When it was over, the Arabian Peninsula was unified under the Caliphate for the first time in its history. But Abu Bakr was not finished with his greatest general. He sent Khalid northeast into Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the ancient heartland of civilizations stretching back to the beginning of recorded history. It was now controlled by the Sassanid Persian Empire, one of the most formidable military powers on Earth. Khalid entered Mesopotamia and began to win, battle after battle. The Persian commanders he faced were experienced, well-equipped, and defending their own territory. It did not matter. Khalid's combination of cavalry mobility, tactical improvisation, and psychological dominance proved too much. He captured the city of Al-Hira, a kingdom allied with Persia, and pushed deeper into Persian territory, winning engagements that should have been defeats. And then came the order that would produce one of the most legendary marches in military history. In early 634 CE, the Muslim armies in Syria were struggling against the Byzantine Empire. They were outnumbered, spread thin, and calling for reinforcements. Abu Bakr sent word to Khalid, leave Iraq, cross the Syrian desert, and reinforce the Syrian front immediately. The Syrian desert was not simply difficult terrain. It was, in the estimation of most commanders, impassable at speed. Stretching hundreds of miles, it offered almost no water, no shade, and no mercy. To move an army across it quickly enough to matter was considered, by any rational military calculation, impossible. Khalid did it in as little as 18 days, according to some historical accounts. He solved the water problem through a method as brutal as it was ingenious. Camels were given large amounts of water to drink before the march, then slaughtered along the route when their water-filled stomachs could be used to sustain the men. It was desperate, unconventional, and it worked. His forces arrived at the Syrian front not exhausted and spent, but ready to fight. At the Battle of Ajnadayn in July 634, Khalid led the combined Muslim forces against a Byzantine army under the command of the Emperor Heraclius's brother, Theodore. The Byzantines were routed. Then Khalid pushed northward. City after city began to fall. Bosra. Then, in 634 and 635, the great city of Damascus itself, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, its stone walls rising from an oasis at the foot of the anti-Lebanon mountains, its markets flowing with silk and cedar and wheat, was besieged and taken. Emperor Heraclius, watching from his court in Antioch, understood what he was dealing with. This was not a raiding party. This was not a local uprising. This was a general of uncommon genius, leading an army of extraordinary will, and they were dismantling the Byzantine Empire's eastern territories piece by piece. Heraclius began to prepare. He called in every available force. He formed alliances. He mustered armies from across the empire and beyond. Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Franks, Christian Arabs. Something had to stop Khalid ibn al-Walid. And now, we must pause here for a moment and ask you directly. Looking at everything this man accomplished, the impossible march through the desert, the victories against the Persians, the fall of Damascus, which of these feats surprises you most? Leave your answer in the comments, because what comes next will make everything that came before seem like a rehearsal. August 636 CE. The plains near the Yarmouk River, along what are now the borders of modern Syria and Jordan, southeast of the Sea of Galilee. On one side of the field, a Byzantine force assembled by Emperor Heraclius. Estimates from ancient sources range widely, but modern historians place the number at somewhere between 40,000 and 100,000 men. It included Byzantine regulars, Armenian heavy cavalry, Slavic mercenaries, Frankish warriors from the far west of Europe, and Arab Christian auxiliaries under the Sassanid king. It was one of the largest armies the Byzantine Empire had deployed in a generation. On the other side, the Rashidun Muslim army, numerically inferior, composed almost entirely of Arab warriors, men who fought on horseback and on foot, carrying their faith as heavily as their weapons. Their nominal commander was Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, appointed by the new caliph Umar, because Umar had already stripped Khalid of his overall command, likely for political reasons, possibly from a fear that the soldiers had come to revere the general more than God himself. But Abu Ubaidah, a man of deep wisdom and profound humility, had no illusions about who the greatest military mind in that army was. When the Byzantine host appeared on the horizon, he handed full tactical command of the battle to Khalid ibn al-Walid. What followed over the next 6 days is considered by military historians to be one of the most consequential engagements in the entire history of the ancient world. The battlefield was a flat plain, but it was surrounded on 3 sides by deep ravines, the Yarmouk River to the south, the Ruqad tributary to the west, and sheer drops to the north. Khalid had chosen this ground deliberately. He had lured the Byzantines into a killing field. If they advanced and were broken, there would be nowhere to run. The Byzantines opened the battle with the confidence of numbers. They came in waves, heavy infantry, cavalry charges, synchronized assaults along the entire front. For the first days of fighting, the battle swayed back and forth with brutal intensity. There were moments when the Byzantine lines punched through the Muslim center and the fighting reached the edge of the Muslim camp itself. There were moments when Khalid's cavalry seemed to disappear, only to reappear impossibly on an entirely different part of the battlefield, riding fast and hard into the Byzantine flank, changing the course of the engagement within minutes, then galloping away again. This was the signature of his genius, a mobile cavalry reserve, a flying squadron under his personal command that he moved with terrifying speed and precision from crisis point to crisis point across the entire 6-mile front. Where the line broke, Khalid appeared. Where the enemy surged, Khalid struck. Modern military historians have written that no other commander of the era demonstrated this kind of dynamic battlefield management, the ability to see the entire field simultaneously and respond faster than the enemy could adapt. On the final day, Khalid closed the trap. He ordered a general assault while his cavalry sealed the ravines. The Byzantine line did not simply retreat, it collapsed. Tens of thousands of soldiers, flanked on 3 sides and driven toward the ravines behind them, fell in the chaos that followed. Ancient sources record Byzantine casualties numbering in the tens of thousands. The entire Byzantine field army in Syria had been effectively destroyed. It was, as historians have called it ever since, the end of Byzantine rule in Syria. When the news reached Emperor Heraclius in Antioch, the old emperor, who had once been the greatest warrior in the Christian world, the man who had defeated the Sassanid Persians and reclaimed the true cross, reportedly looked back one last time toward the land he was now abandoning and said, "Farewell, Syria. What a fine land you are for the enemy." The Battle of Yarmouk was Khalid ibn al-Walid's masterpiece, the greatest military achievement of a career that had produced nothing but remarkable military achievements. And it should have been the moment of his supreme elevation, statues, honors, glory without limit. Instead, Caliph Umar removed him from command entirely. The reasons, even now, remain partially obscure. Some historians cite a personal tension between Umar and Khalid that stretched back years. Others point to political calculations, the need to consolidate Syria under an administrator rather than a conqueror, the need to reassure Arab tribal allies that no single man had grown too powerful. And there is the version whispered in the historical records, that Umar feared the cult of personality that had formed around Khalid, that common soldiers and ordinary people across the Arab world had begun to speak of this man as if his victories were his own, rather than God's, and that this was dangerous for a new state built on the principle that all power and glory belonged to God alone. Khalid said almost nothing publicly. He accepted the dismissal. He continued to serve as a subordinate officer under the command of other men, fighting in lesser roles in the sieges of Homs and Aleppo. Men who had served under him, who had crossed deserts and faced empires at his side, urged him to protest. Some urged him to rebel. Khalid refused. Historical accounts record that he complained only once privately, that he felt he had been treated as worthless, discarded after a lifetime of service. But he never raised his sword against his own people. Around the year 638 CE, Umar removed Khalid completely from his military command and from his governorship of Kinasrin. Khalid retired to Homs, the ancient city in central Syria. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by armies and battlefields, by the noise and heat and blood of war. Now he sat in a quiet house, growing old. When he died in 642 CE, accounts say he had only 3 things of value left in the world: a horse, a sword, and a single slave. The man who had conquered Iraq, unified Arabia, defeated Persia, and broken the Byzantine Empire at Yarmouk, died with almost nothing of material wealth. What he left behind, however, was something that no amount of wealth could have purchased. At the end, it is said he spoke his last words in bitter wonder, that his body was covered in scars from 100 battles, that there was not a hand's width of his skin that had not been cut or burned or struck. And yet, after all of that, after all the wars and all the enemies and all the odds that had been stacked against him, he was dying quietly in a bed. He had wanted to die as a martyr on the battlefield. He never got that wish. He was buried in Homs, in a mosque that would bear his name for centuries, a place that still stands today in the ancient city of the land he helped conquer. In the 14th century since his death, military strategists from Napoleon's campaigns to the modern war colleges of the United States and Europe have studied Khalid ibn al-Walid's battles. His use of mobile cavalry, his ability to read terrain and exploit it, his psychological mastery of both his own troops and his enemies, all of it has been analyzed, dissected, and taught as foundational military thinking. He is, by the consensus of historians across cultures and faiths, one of the greatest military commanders who ever lived. He never lost a battle, not one. In a career spanning decades, fighting across deserts and mountains and river plains, against the 2 most powerful empires on earth, and against the fractured tribes of his own peninsula, Khalid ibn al-Walid found a way to win every single time. How is that possible? Perhaps the answer lies not just in his tactics, but in something harder to quantify, a quality of mind that could remain absolutely calm in conditions of absolute chaos, that could see order where others saw only confusion, and that could impose his will on a battlefield the way a sculptor imposes his vision on stone. The sword of God, never sheathed in defeat, never dulled by failure, and now laid to rest in Homs, in the Syrian earth, one of history's most extraordinary men, almost forgotten by the world he helped create.
Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. Now don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, did you already know who Khalid ibn al-Walid was, or did you discover him here today?